Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive? Today we're talking generations.
8 of them, to be exact.
8 generations all alive right now. From the greatest generation all the way to Gen Alpha and even the brand new Gen Beta.
We're going to unpack what makes each generation tick, how those generations view the world, and how they interact with each other.
You've probably heard a lot about boomers versus millennials.
But it's way more nuanced than that.
Exactly. We're going to go deeper than just those typical labels and look at the shared experiences that really shape a generation's values.
Because those values end up impacting all of society.
Right. And it all goes back to what Dr. Deborah Carr said.
That generations are defined by the moments that shape them.
Yeah. It's like their defining moments create a shared narrative for each generation, almost like a collective coming-of-age story.
And understanding those narratives can be super useful, even in your own life. Think about it. Have you ever felt a disconnect with someone older or younger?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Like you're speaking different languages.
Exactly. It happens a lot in the workplace. So to really understand all this, we got to start at the foundation, the pre-digital world.
Ah, yes. Before the internet was part of daily life.
We're talking about the greatest generation.
Born 1901 to 1927.
And the silent generation.
Born 1928 to 1945.
Just imagine, their lives were shaped by events that sound almost mythical to us now. The Great Depression, World War II.
A Cold War.
They sound like historical fiction.
But those events instilled a sense of resilience in those generations. A real focus on community.
And we still see their values reflected today.
For the greatest generation, it was all about national unity, sacrificing for the greater good. They literally saved the world from fascism.
And then they came home and rebuilt their own nation.
It's incredible.
And they weren't just rebuilding buildings.
Right. They laid the foundation for so much of what we consider normal today.
The suburbs, the nuclear family, the American dream.
Even rock and roll.
That's amazing when you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah.
But all that success created a very different world for the silent generation. They inherited all this stability, an economic boom.
But also the threat of nuclear war, the conformity of McCarthyism, and a ton of really stifling social expectations.
I can see how all that would make them silent.
But they weren't passive by any means. They just weren't as loud. They built all the infrastructure and institutions, even the technology that paved the way for the digital age.
Their contributions were huge.
Totally. It's like they set the stage for the world to change dramatically. And then right on their heels came the generation that truly shattered the mold, the baby boomers.
Born between 1946 and 1964.
It seems like they embody both progress and conflict at the same time.
It really does. Almost like their story is a microcosm of the entire 20th century.
They grew up with so much prosperity. It was unprecedented, and I guess that allowed them to question everything.
Exactly. They questioned traditional social norms, their parents' authority. They weren't afraid to challenge the status quo.
They gave us the civil rights movement.
The Vietnam War protests, the sexual revolution.
But all that change didn't come without a price, right? There was disillusionment, too.
Oh, definitely. The assassinations of JFK and MLK, the Watergate scandal, the economic downturns of the 70s, it all kind of created a shadow over their story.
That makes sense. It's no coincidence that they also pioneered like a more introspective approach to personal growth, all that therapy.
Right. So then the question becomes, how did this generation, so focused on challenging norms, approach raising their own kids? Because their kids, Generation X, would inherit a super different world.
Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980.
Growing up with the rise of divorce, dual-income households, and the whole latchkey kid phenomenon, it was a stark contrast to the stability of their parents' childhoods.
So is that where the classic Gen X cynicism comes from? Like a reaction to the, I don't know, shattered promises of the boomer generation?
There's definitely a connection there. But let's not forget, Gen X also came of age with incredible technological advancements.
Right. Personal computers, cable TV, the beginnings of the internet.
They were pioneers.
They were the ones who gave us grunge music.
A perfect mix of disillusionment and rebellious energy.
But as Gen X was figuring out dial-up, another generation was being born into a reality where technology was already everywhere.
The millennials, the first digital natives, born between 1981 and 1996.
So we've gone from pre-digital to digital, and now we have to think, how would you describe the biggest differences between a pre-digital and a digital childhood?
And what are the implications for how those generations see the world. It's wild.
It really is wild. Like before the break, we were talking about how much things have changed from pre-digital to digital.
And that transition has completely shaped generational experiences.
Totally. Think about it. For the greatest generation, technology was like the radio and the telephone. But for millennials, it's like the whole world is in their pocket.
It's a massive difference.
Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996.
Right. They never even knew a world without the internet.
Right.
Or instant communication.
Yeah.
Or this constant stream of information everywhere.
So how has all that shaped how they see the world?
Well, it's definitely made them adaptable and super tech savvy. I mean, they've seen the internet evolve like crazy, from dial-up to smartphones.
Oh, yeah. They were there for all of it.
And all that constant change made them, like, comfortable with disruption. They just embrace new technologies and platforms. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. But millennials also, like, experience some major disruptions in the real world, too, right? Not just the digital world.
Absolutely. 9/11 happened when a lot of them were teenagers or in their early 20s.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And then the 2008 financial crisis hit right as they were starting their careers.
So crazy to think about. So on top of being digital natives, they also had to deal with economic uncertainty and global instability.
Exactly. So it makes sense that they're seen as kind of pragmatic and skeptical.
Millennials. Oh, yeah, for sure.
They're not afraid to question authority or challenge traditional systems. And they really demand more transparency and accountability from, well, everyone.
We see it in their activism.
Yeah.
And their entrepreneurial spirit, even just how they approach work-life balance.
They're definitely all about work-life balance.
Speaking of which, millennials are often credited with, like, pioneering the gig economy and remote work.
Which has totally exploded recently.
I know, right? But was all that driven by necessity, or did they just want a different way of working?
It's probably a little both, honestly. The gig economy offered them a ton of flexibility and independence, and millennials love autonomy.
And work-life integration, which makes total sense.
But the gig economy also, emerged during a time of economic instability, when it was harder to find those traditional jobs.
So it was kind of a push and a pull situation.
Yeah,
But while all that was going on, another generation was coming up right behind them.
Fully immersed in the digital world from day one.
Gen Z.
Born between 1997 and 2012.
The true digital natives. Never knew a world without smartphones or social media or instant access to anything.
And that has huge implications for, how they learn and communicate and how they see the world in general.
It's almost like they're fluent in a language that older generations are still trying to learn.
Right.
But besides all the tech stuff, what else defines Gen Z? Like, what are they all about?
Where they're super diverse.
Yeah.
And globally aware. Social justice is really important to them.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Climate change and mental health are big issues for them.
It feels like they're really focused on making the world better.
They are. And a lot of them are also digital entrepreneurs or content creators and activists. And they use online platforms to advocate for change.
It's like they took that millennial desire for a better world and amplified it, using tech as their megaphone.
I like that, using tech as their megaphone.
But with all that focus on digital stuff, does Gen Z ever, unplug? Do they even value face-to-face interactions?
They do, but it might look different. For them, online communities and virtual hangouts, all that's normal. Social media is how they connect. So for Gen Z, face-to-face might be a bit more intentional.
More curated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how tech shapes the way we think about connection. It means something different for each generation.
Totally. But it's important to remember that millennials and Gen Z aren't these giant blocks where everyone is exactly the same.
Exactly. There's tons of variation in each generation. Not all millennials are obsessed with avocado toast, and not every Gen Z is glued to TikTok 24/7.
So true. It's all about understanding the trends, not the stereotypes.
Exactly.
But before we move on, we can't forget there are two more generations, Gen Alpha and Gen Beta.
Right. Millennials and Gen Z are out there working and changing culture, but Gen Alpha and Beta are just starting their journey.
Gen Alpha, born between 2010 and 2024, they're the children of millennials.
And they're growing up in a world where, AI is becoming normal.
AI,
Yeah.
virtual reality, augmented reality, all this stuff is blurring the lines between physical and digital.
It's insane.
I can't even imagine what their world is going to look like in a few years.
Either.
And then there's Gen Beta, born from 2025 onward.
The true unknowns. They're the ones who are going to inherit the world shaped by all 7 generations before them.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about.
I know. It's too early to say for sure what Gen Beta will be like. But one thing's for certain, their world's going to be super complex
Yeah.
and totally interconnected.
It's going to be shaped by climate change and technology and all the crazy social and political stuff happening right now.
Right.
It's a lot to take in. We've gone from the greatest generation who rebuilt the world after a war to Gen Beta, who's inheriting a world, well, on the brink of who even knows.
I know. It's a good reminder that this whole generational story is constantly unfolding.
It is.
And each generation faces its own challenges and has its own opportunities, and each one contributes to how society evolves.
And maybe if we understand all these generational differences, it could help us all get along better. You know, foster empathy,
Right.
find some common ground, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
We really are. So let's switch gears a bit. We've talked a lot about the defining characteristics of each generation.
Yay.
But what about how those generations actually interact with each other? That can be choicy sometimes, especially in the workplace or in families, even in online communities.
Oh, yeah, I bet. I've definitely had some okay boomer moments myself, but it's got to be more than just like memes and generational clashes, right?
Oh, definitely. There's so much potential for collaboration, mentorship, and even mutual understanding.
I love that.
We just have to look for it.
So how can we use all these different strengths and navigate all the differences? How do we turn all those generational clashes into opportunities? That's what we'll explore next time when we wrap up this deep dive into generations. Okay, so we're back. And like after all that, the big question is, how do all these 8 generations actually work together?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about these abstract categories. It's real people in real-world situations.
Right. So let's get specific. Say you're a millennial manager. You've got a team with Gen Xers and Gen Zers. What kind of challenges are you going to run into?
Communication is a big one. Gen X grew up with a more hands-off approach, right? So they're going to prefer direct communication, get to the point. But Gen Z, they're used to constant feedback and collaborating. So they might need more guidance, more reassurance.
So it's like they have different operating systems?
Kind of, yeah. But the thing is, that millennial manager, they can use those differences to their advantage.
Oh, so.
It's all about generational synergy. The Gen Xers on the team, they've got tons of experience, institutional knowledge. They know how to get stuff done. And then you've got the Gen Zers. They bring new ideas. And they're tech wizards. Plus, they totally understand how to connect with younger audiences.
So basically you're saying each generation brings something unique to the table.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where all those strengths can shine through.
That makes sense. But what about outside of work? Like in families, how do those generations mesh?
Well, think about it. Lots of families have 4 or even 5 generations alive right now.
Whoa.
You could have a Gen Alpha kid with millennial parents and boomer grandparents, even a silent generation great-grandparent.
Wow. That's a lot of different perspectives all under one roof.
It is. And there are definitely some friction points that come up.
Like what?
Well, technology use is a classic one. Boomer grandparents might be totally baffled by how much time their Gen Alpha grandkids spend on screens. But the millennial parents are more chill about it.
Right. Or even something as basic as music. A Gen Z who's into K-pop and a boomer who loves classic rock.
Good luck getting them to agree on a playlist.
Exactly. But those differences can actually be a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Like maybe that Gen Z kid plays some K-pop for their boomer grandparent, and it sparks a whole conversation about music and culture.
I love that. Turning potential conflicts into chances to learn from each other.
Because honestly, we can all learn something from other generations, even if it's just a new way of looking at an old problem.
Right. And I think that leads to the most important point. How do we, all of us, navigate the future in a way that respects those generational differences, but also finds some common ground?
Yeah, because this isn't just about the past, right? It's about the future. And all 8 of these generations are going to shape that future together, working together, and hopefully making things better.
That's the goal. And it starts with understanding that this isn't a competition. It's a collaboration. We have to appreciate what makes each generation unique and then use those strengths to solve the big problems we all face.
Like climate change, economic inequality, social justice. Those aren't generational problems. Those are human problems.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, if we start to understand each other's stories and how each generation sees the world, then we can find those solutions. We can build a future that's more fair, more sustainable, more compassionate, where everyone can thrive.
I love that. Honestly, after this deep dive, I'm feeling a bit more hopeful. It's easy to focus on the negative stuff, the stereotypes, But there's so much more to it.
There really is.
So, deep divers, as we wrap up, think about the generational stories in your own life. Who are the people who shaped how you see the world? What can you learn from other generations? How can you help build a better future?
Those are some great questions. And remember, this whole generational conversation never really ends. It's constantly changing, and we're all part of it.
So keep learning, keep exploring, keep diving deep. Until next time.